So a lot of you guys may have already heard by now that the Goonie boss trial wrapped up. And they were found guilty partly, okay? Some of the stuff they could not prove that the murders were part of a racketeering conspiracy. And this was actually a lot more complicated case than some people may have supposed, because it wasn't really about whether or not they did these hits, okay? It was about whether or not they did them as part of a conspiracy to further some particular goal for the gang, or if it was just random. And this was what the jury had to decide, and that was not as easy to decide as one might think, because as the lawyers for these two sides were making the point, it's not necessarily about whether or not you think that these guys were out there, doing dirt in the streets and whether or not they should be off the streets. The jury wasn't delegated the task of deciding that particular point. It was this racketeering charge. And the racketeering charge is a very technical term. A lot of times people think that somebody didn't get justice or somebody, was wrongly convicted, and they're not paying attention to the specific charge. This is one of the most common things that I see with complaints about the outcomes of trials. So if you feel like the outcome of this trial wasn't right, make sure you're paying attention to what exactly they were charged with. So anyways, as the media is reporting, three reported leaders of a street gang, and again, that term leaders, I say this every time I do a video about this, there's no leaders, but anyways, of a particular gang faction that terrorized Inglewood were found guilty of racketeering charges. This was last Wednesday. The trial was 5 weeks. And there was evidence from nearly a dozen murders and multiple shootings that allegedly were perpetrated by the Goonie gang over 30 months. So O-Dog, their homie T, and their homie JoJo were, they were the ones that were on trial here. And the jurors gave it a verdict, like I said, that was kind of mixed. So they were found guilty of a racketeering conspiracy. And that's honestly an outcome that I kind of disagree with. But the jurors, there were only a few hours earlier, they had sent a note to the judge saying that they were deadlocked. And with all the evidence that they, presented in court about with the social media posts and everything, some people might think that, well, why would they be deadlocked? Again, it's exactly what this racketeering thing means. So they also found prosecutors had not proved that a handful of the murders and shootings that were attributed to the gang or to the individual defendants were perpetrated as part of a racketeering conspiracy. So some of the murders they didn't see as part of that. So they were set to return to the Dirksen Federal Courthouse that Thursday for the second phase of the trial, in which they would weigh whether the shootings and killings that were part of the racketeering case were committed in a cold and calculated manner. They would also decide other factors that could also add decades to the defendant's potential prison sentences. So Romeo, who's O-Dog, and T face mandatory life sentences, and JoJo faces at least 20 years. And the panel on Wednesday morning sent a note to the U.S. District Judge stating that they were unable to reach a verdict. So they were sent back to the jury room by that judge to continue their deliberations. And the panel of 5 men and 6 women announced that verdict about 4 hours after that. So these are long days for this jury. And if you're a juror that lives in Chicago, even if you don't live near Goonie gang territory and you just live in the city, I mean, these guys have now seen your face. Okay, and a lot of people who they know may have seen your face. And so jurors sat through 20 days of testimony, including from Goonie gang members who were cooperating with prosecutors. And they were hearing the witnesses, they were hearing the social media posts. And in the social media posts, the members were bragging about shooting rivals. And for everybody that's making these social media posts, man, I mean, the self-snitch, you can't believe some of the stuff these guys, especially the younger guys, are saying these days on social media. I mean, you would think they might as well just go to the police and turn themselves in. I mean, it's that bad. But anyways, the gang even printed T-shirts with Goonie gang emblazoned on them. So between 2014 and 2016, according to prosecutors, these 3 Goonie members, okay, and they called them bosses. The prosecutors called them bosses, but again, a term you always have to take with a grain of salt. They said they were complicit or pulled the trigger in some of these shootings. So one of them was a guy named Jonathan. He was killed in January of 2014. Alonzo was killed in March of 2014. Stanley was killed in October of 2014. A woman named Crystal was killed in November of 2014. A guy named Andre was killed on December 13th of 2015. A guy named Davon was killed in 2016. A guy named Gerald was killed in 2016. A guy named Ramal was killed in 2016. Another guy named Gerald was killed in June of 2016. And a guy named Kenneth was killed in July of 2016. And a lot of these guys were innocent, man. This is what I was making a video about before. A lot of these guys were innocent. So one of the guys, the guy who was killed in the barbershop, he was waiting to get his hair cut. This was in an Inglewood barbershop. And they did this hit in front of at least one kid. And then O-Dog, Romeo, who was charged with 7 killings, they said he, quote, murdered his way to the top. Now, on all 7 of those, it didn't say that he was the trigger puller. I think on some of them he was just there. And anyways, this was, they said, a relatively small faction. And it was based on his willingness to shoot rivals, his ascendance to the top. So what exactly the top means, again, we don't know, because it's not, these gangs are not structured. So it's not like he's the chairman or whatever, like the GD said. It's not like that. So what exactly the top is referring to? But his brother was charged with witness intimidation during the trial after a law enforcement officer spotted his brother, and his name is Roscoe, glaring at a witness from outside the courtroom and then mouthing words to the effect of "I'll get you," while standing in the third row of the courtroom gallery. The witness had just testified. So for all the shootings that the prosecutors attributed to the Goonies, the gang controlled only a few blocks of their Inglewood neighborhood, they said, and did not appear to be involved in drug trafficking or other money-making enterprises that underpinned the violence of the hierarchical street gangs that once dominated Chicago, they said. So a lot of this was not proving that this was part of like an organized gang conspiracy is very tough with these type of gangs nowadays. With the mafia, it's easy, it's doable. But with these gangs, it's not. Because a lot of this stuff, honestly, like, they hit the wrong guys. I mean, it was like mistakes. Their lawyers were trying to undermine the government's picture of a coordinated criminal enterprise. They were saying that these 3 guys had been involved in shootings that were carried out as a matter of self-defense in one of the city's most violent neighborhoods. They were alleging that it was like kill or be killed. The Goonies had to do this as self-defense. Evidence that was tying the individual gang leaders to particular slangs and shootings was weak, they said. And they said that they were relying almost entirely on the testimony of people that had cut deals with prosecutors. So federal authorities recently have brought similar charges against other small gang cliques. One of them, as you guys know, was the Wicked Town Traveling Vice Lords. And they brought it against O-Block. Again, difficult to prove that it's organized, that it's part of a conspiracy, and the racketeering thing it's difficult to do, man. But proving that they killed somebody, I mean, they were on social media bragging about it. Now, a lot of these guys cap on social media, and this is one of the things that I say to guys who are obviously like out here just running their mouths on Twitter or whatever. It's like, you might be capping. Well, the jury would have to figure out that you're capping. And are they going to be able to figure that out? And your freedom is going to depend on that? Like, guys better think twice and 3 times before doing that, man. And the shorties, I mean, they're just doing it like crazy. And usually when you say, like, you're self-snitching right here, they'll delete it. Like, that's been my experience. Like, I'll just type in as a response to some of their comments, I'll be like, you snitching. Like, this is self-snitching. And they'll delete it. They won't argue with me. No, it's not. They'll just delete it. So sometimes, it helps if you remind them and make them aware of it, because a lot of the stuff they're capping about stuff they didn't do. And I'm not saying that the Goonie boss guys were capping about stuff they didn't do, but I'm saying, I mean, we all have seen it on social media, like shorties it's out there like running their mouths, capping about stuff that their gang supposedly did, and just say you're snitching, and that usually is enough to get them to delete it and remind everybody else like not to do it. So anyways, man, but yeah, social media played a big role in this trial, man. a big role. And I wonder if they would have beaten the case if it had not been for their social media posts. That's an unanswered question, but it's the question that's the most intriguing to me. Did that do it? Was that the straw that broke the camel's back in this case? You guys let me know what you think in the comment section about the Goonie trial, man, and the outcome of them being found guilty on this for some of the stuff, but not for all of it, being part of that racketeering conspiracy. This is your boy Winnie C. Report. I'm out.